Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. So good afternoon, everyone. I want to welcome you to the last Fireside Chat in our first series of Fireside Chats and webinars we have planned. We will be having, continuing to have these webinars over the next few weeks with new topics we believe are going to be very helpful to our clients and potential clients, especially during these challenging times. I'm Frank Niesenbaum, VP of Sales for E2B Tech and C2B Tech, and will be your host today. I'm very excited to be joined by Ken Knight, one of our senior consultants, and as I like to call him, the resident manufacturing expert. How's that, Ken?
Very flattering, thank you.
Anyway, so Ken will be helping us understand some of the important issues that we're finding around our manufacturing clients during and after the pandemic, as well as how technology might be able to help the businesses navigate through these tough times and really come out on the other side even stronger than ever. So we hope everyone enjoys the warmth of our fireplaces as we bring this information to you. We're going to have to change over to a spring background. Somebody mentioned that to me today because hopefully we're hitting in the spring and it's going to get warm. So we know these are tough times for everybody, but we're confident that our national spirit and cooperation will get us all through it. And there's some glimmer of hope with some things starting to open up around the country now. So that'll be great. So in today's chat, as we mentioned, we'll be talking about the effects of the pandemic on manufacturing, as well as how technology can help everyone work as they work through this. But before we begin, we have a couple of really quick poll questions we'd like to have you answer for us. One we ask quite a bit in our chats is, did you or do you have a continuity or contingency plan in place to help you manage a crisis like this one? So we'll give you a minute or two to answer the question just to get a sense of preparedness of some of the people. One more minute. Okay, that looks like the answers we're going to get. The second question is just to get another sense of the types of, what's going on with some of your businesses. Which category best fits your operation? You're an essential business, essential service, your business as usual. You're open for business, but all remote or limited staff, or you're closed indefinitely, but hopefully with plans to reopen shortly. Okay, we'll give you a few more seconds. Okay, that's helpful. That's good information, gives us a sense of, kinds of things going on out there and what you may be ready for or not ready for. So Ken, let's jump into it. I wanted to kind of start the conversation about, with what you are seeing out in the manufacturing companies I know you're working with, our clients, but with your experience in the companies you're around social and physical distancing, kind of how they're dealing with it, things are going on, what changes you see?
Okay. Well, if you think about distancing in general, the whole concept behind that is that it is a numbers game. It's a combination of reducing the number of people exposed to a potential pathogen and or limiting the amount of exposure that they have. And there's several different ways that you can actually do that. The one that springs to mind for everybody at first is physical distancing or spatial distancing, where people are moved apart from each other. The 6 feet apart you have to stand when you're in the line at the grocery store. Another way to do that, though, is time distancing. And I'll get into that a little bit more here shortly. And then the last aspect of that is personal protection, a way to limit potential exposure to a possible pathogen. Now, physical distancing, the first one that I mentioned, or spatial distancing, it's generally easier to do for office staff than it is for people in the actual manufacturing shop. You know, if you think about it, you're kind of hard-pressed to move a piece of capital equipment and all the raw material to somebody's house.
Right.
Whereas if someone's working in the office, predominantly they're going to be sitting at a desk with a computer, and it's a lot easier to go ahead and move them around or have them physically distanced. The primary example of physical distancing for an office person would be to work from home. You know, it's something that you're doing, Frank. I do it all the time. But it's new for a lot of companies to have their people working from home. And if it can't be done all of the time, it might be able to be done most of the time. An example I have is one of my clients, the person who processes their AP, comes in twice a week for just a few hours on each visit. The purpose of the visit is to grab mail, grab invoices, grab shipping documents that came in when items were received in the back, and those they take home and they go ahead and do all of their data entry remotely. The second visit is because it's a large distributed company and the AP person does AP for all of their locations. The second visit is to print checks. So even though she ends up working from home probably 36 out of 40 hours a week, she's got a couple 2-hour visits spread in between during the week. You can also look at physically distancing work areas for people. You know, you can have offices at different ends of the actual office space. That same client, I know for a fact they've only got about 4 people who are in the office at any given time, and they have a relatively large office space. So the offices that those people are working in, or those spaces, are physically distanced within the office space to the 4 corners. So they try to maintain that spatial distancing when they are in the office. Another way to look at doing that is the separation between the office and the shop. My wife does accounts payable for a different manufacturing firm locally, and what they've done is they actually have a door between the shop and the office, and they change the key codes that people from the office can't get back to the shop and people from the shop can't get into the office. So instead of having the receiving people constantly walking papers up to her, they're putting them in an inbox that she can retrieve once a day. Again, trying to keep that physical distancing and limit the contact. In the shop, it is potentially, depending on what you do and how your plant is laid out, possible to provide some distance between workstations. If you had 2 guys at a bench, potentially, you know, can the bench be split? Can you move one guy to a different location? Things such as that. Time distancing is the concept of having people in the building at different times. Examples of that could be split shifts. If you have 50 employees, have 25 work first shift and 25 work second. That can even assist with physical distancing. If they have dedicated machines or workstations and you alter them, like everybody at the even-numbered workstations works first shift, everyone at the odd-numbered workstations works second shift. Another way that you can do that is partial work weeks. I have a client who's a manufacturer that does that. Part of the office and even part of the shop work Monday through Thursday, the other Tuesday through Friday. So if you think about that, that's a 40% reduction in overlap because Mondays and Fridays, there's no overlap. They either work from home on the day off, or another client of mine doing that same thing is doing 4 10-hour days. On personal protection, it's not just masks and gloves. I mean, those are obviously important, and those are going to be part of any reopening plan. But think about limiting shared touches. You know, paperwork, the example given above of using an inbox, material transfers, trying to limit those as much as possible, and dedicated equipment, which we'll talk about a little bit later.
Yeah, no, that's all. You know, it's almost funny. Some of it kind of sounds like, you know, common sense. But, you know, when you're not in a situation where you need to think about it, all the things you just listed make total sense for where we are right now. And frankly, I can see how they carry over into the future. And it's not just about a pandemic. There's some common sense in that.
Oh, yeah, there is. Yeah, I'll talk about that later, too, because it's not just for pandemic situations. there is sense for that. Think about just a really bad cold or flu season.
Yeah, right. Which we've gone through every year. Nothing like this, but that's for sure.
Yeah.
But
And you get lost productivity if people are homesick. So
yeah, that doesn't do any good either. Right. Well, that's all. That's great. And so it makes a lot of sense. So kind of touching on it, you talked about a little bit, talking about, some of the paperwork and some other things. So how do you see technology playing a role in how they're dealing with this now, or they could deal with it during the pandemic, and then how that'll carry over as they go on into the future? I mean, we hear a lot about technology in manufacturing.
Yeah. I mean, obviously work from home is a technology solution in some way, shape, or form.
Yeah.
Whether your business management systems are up in the cloud, whether they're hosted somewhere, or whether you just establish a VPN connection back to the office, and then they fire up a remote desktop or potentially even launch the application locally once the VPN connection is established. Now, those are technological solutions to enable people to work from home. As far as decreasing paperwork, if you look at the office, some of the things that clients can implement, and I'm a Sage 100 guy primarily. Sage 100 is paperless office that can enable you to email customer invoices and statements right from within the system, so you don't actually have to print anything, put it in an envelope, stamps, etc. Anytime collect for receiving customer payments against those invoices, so you don't have to grab checks and do cash receipts manually. On the AP side, doing ACH for AP payments rather than cutting checks yourself is a great way to eliminate paperwork. And again, you're going to save on stamps, money, envelopes, things such as that. And potentially look at some of the business intelligence tools that are out there. I have a lot of clients that have their daily manufacturing meeting, they print reports. Well, what if instead of printing reports, we threw up on a monitor a BI tool that would show them all the relevant information they need for their meeting?
Yeah.
For the shop floor, instead of having paper travelers that go around, consider having terminals out on the shop floor. It's a heck of a lot easier to clean than a piece of paper. If you're a distributor or a manufacturer, potentially scanners for doing your material picks rather than paper. Again, easier to clean. And that same concept of business intelligence tools instead of printing reports. I think another thing to think about when we're talking about scanners is using shop equipment in a dedicated fashion. So if you're going to get scanners, make sure that Bob and Joe have their own so that they don't have to share scanners, and we're eliminating the shared touches. Same thing could potentially go for forklifts, could go for those workstations out on the shop floor. Make sure that each of them have their own so that we don't have sharing. That helps eliminate those shared touches and the possibility for spreading a potential pathogen. And there are other types of shop floor automation that are available as well. And I kind of put automation in quotes for that statement, because perhaps it might be possible to build a cradle that would allow someone to move raw material, when right now, instead of them moving that material in a cradle with a forklift, it's two people carrying it. Well, if you can manufacture a cradle, put the raw material in the cradle, one guy uses his dedicated forklift, now again you've eliminated the multiple touches.
Right. Now that's a great idea. I mean, I think I can think of a lot of physical things you could do out on the shop floor. We've seen, one person working more than one machine. They're already kind of isolated in a group like that. I like your point about, data collection and that on the shop floor. You can put those data collection terminals in unique points out, in the shop or the warehouse, that they're not next to each other, not a line waiting for people to do it. I think that all makes a lot of sense around the shop floor. I've seen a lot of good things out there, and the more automation, the less touching. And I like that material movement piece. I mean, I think that's a great thought, because you and I go into a lot of manufacturers, and you people wheeling around with carts, and they're all everybody's touching the same thing, and it doesn't have to be. There's some easy automation that could be done to help that. But I like that.
Well, and think too about when you start combining these things. Let's go back to the example of working the split shift. If you have 50 people and you have 20, then you decide we're going to work a split shift. Now 25 are in during the day, 25 in the evening. Well, you immediately created built-in physical distancing between people. And if you combine that with some automation, whether it's shop floor terminals, scanners, things such as that, which are very easy to clean and wipe down, it kind of, it's almost like an exponential increase in the effectiveness when you start combining these things and doing more than one at a time.
Yeah, and I think, you and I both know the benefit of scanning and automation on the shop floor and places like that. More accurate costing, less mistakes, rapid access to data. You mentioned the BI tools. Suddenly there's data on everybody's desktop that's current. And I think we've probably seen that, and I'm going to kind of transition to it, like you talk about a little bit. In terms of planning, these plans may have been in place for a long time, but nothing ever moved us to do it, right? So now there's a reason. Right. So when we talk about that, in terms of, we asked the question at the beginning about what, whether people had contingency plans in place or not. And so I guess I pose to you, what about these companies? What suggestions about what they should be thinking about today or about in the future, whether they had a plan or not? I don't know.
Well, I think that, like you said, I mean, we've never had to really necessarily think about this before. I was very pleased to see that the people who are attending had contingency plans in place for something like this. That's awesome. But I think for those who haven't, that contingency planning is one of the key things that they need to do right now. Is they need to be prepared for this to happen again. And I think that they need to look at what they were doing then and what's going on now to illuminate the future, to determine what it is that they should be doing if and when this happens again. A couple points to that. One is, I would think way outside the box. I had mentioned to you before, I was speaking with a manufacturing client of ours, and believe it or not, the operations manager is working from home. And he's able to do it fairly effectively, part of the reason being because they're using business intelligence tools. So instead of people looking at reports, they can actually hold a Zoom meeting or a GoToWebinar and put the business intelligence tools up for everyone to see at the same time, much more easily than they could if they were passing around pieces of paper that people had written notes on. But one of the challenges that he had, that he told me, was the fact that his reports were getting at him in any communication method possible. So as I was dealing with him on a question that he had, his cell phone is going off, it's ringing, he's getting texts, he's getting instant messaged through Teams, he's getting emails. And he said, you know what, this is the one thing we never thought about, which is putting in place recommendations for when we have people working from home, how are you going to communicate with them? Because he said it was almost getting to the point where it was unmanageable. He was getting people coming at him in 6 different channels of communication all at the same time, right. And that's just crazy for anyone.
Yeah.
I think the other thing to look at then too is, even though we're going to start getting back to work in Ohio in the coming weeks, there are still future concerns. The epidemiologists are not sure. By coming back to work, there's a possibility that COVID-19 could spike again. Mm-hmm. So no one really knows for sure. We sure as heck pray that it doesn't, but it could. The epidemiologists think this disease may actually be seasonal, so it could be one of those things that's going to come around like flu every fall until we have good vaccines, until we have good testing in place. Will there be a COVID-20, a COVID-21, or another form of SARS or MERS in the future? The coronavirus that we're dealing with now that causes COVID-19 is bad. There could be something else on the horizon we don't know about, so we need to have the contingency plans in place. And then, as we talked about, we have to give some consideration to the fact that, forget the bad diseases, what about lost productivity during a bad cold or flu season? Mm-hmm. There was even a time at E2B when I went into the office late last fall where I swear everybody was coughing. You know, you were in that day that I was in, and everyone was coughing. So
Yeah.
you think about in any work environment, if it's a bad cold or flu season, you could end up potentially with a lot of people at home sick and the associated lost productivity.
Yeah.
So I think we need to have plans in place for all of that. And then, of course, you have to have your own back to work plan. You know, regardless of what the governor lays out about which businesses can open up when, how are you going to open up? What is your plan for opening up? Are you going to adopt some of the things that we were talking about? You know, one of the things, work from home. It's turned out with a lot of studies that work from home can be much more efficient for certain employees.
Yeah.
So, you know, what's the new normal going to look like? Even if we don't get hit with this again, you need to get back into work. How are you going to do that? Well, you still have some employees working from home. And, you know, what are you going to do if this thing does happen to come back? And then lastly, I think we have had several clients who have approached us, and our consultants now are pretty busy because they said, you know what, this is a great time for us to knock out that ERP project. We wanted to get that business intelligence tool you've been talking to us about up and running for a long time. Things are a little slow. Now let's do it. The one manufacturer, the controller, she said, we're basically shut down. I'm at home. I got time. Let's go. So now is a great time to consider looking at that ERP project, adding additional modules, getting BI tools up and running, or potentially do an upgrade.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that not only is it a good time to do some planning, but potentially to get things in place that are going to technologically support the go forward, both in terms of reopening and if this happens to rear its ugly head again.
Yeah, and you said it well throughout the conversation. I mean, whether it's this one or a new one or something or a flare up or a kickback, planning, right? So you talked about it, whether it's work from home, we've talked about a lot of things in the shop. I mean, technology wise, you know, we both know there's so many tools out there. You talked about shop floor and automation in the warehouse, you know, new technologies like IoT and AI and all those things. You know, I liked what you were just talking about where, you know, right now we talked about this the other day in one of our other webinars, there is some time, right? So, you know, when you think about, you know, data and what's out there, now's a good time to look at those things. Where could your business get better and leverage these new technologies? And I think you've given them some good thoughts around the physical side and the other pieces that go along with that. So I think that's great. I give you one last, anything on your mind, any last tip or advice that you have before we wrap things up?
You know, pretty much just stay safe, but don't be afraid to think outside of the box. I was working with a client earlier today who I was just upgrading. I upgraded one of their systems yesterday and talking to one of the newer employees. And he said, you know, a lot of the folks who have been here a while are very comfortable with how we do things, but I'm not. I think there are better ways that we can do this that will allow us to all be more efficient. And I've been given the green light by management to go ahead and take a look at those. So he and I have scheduled a call, and we're going to start digging into, okay, your system's been upgraded. What does the new system bring to the table? How can you guys, you know, the old adage, work smarter, not harder kind of thing.
Yeah.
But working smarter rather than harder in today's environment, especially with COVID-19, I think it is the key.
Yeah, makes total sense. Hey, thanks, Ken. Appreciate your joining me today, sharing your knowledge and experience with the audience.
Thanks.
I know that you know a lot about manufacturing and you're out there doing it every day. You're the guy in the trenches, right? You're feeling it every day. And hopefully the audience can take away some things that they can do now, but also some things to think about to plan for the future. You know, we hope that the information we brought today is helpful to all of you that joined us today. I encourage you to check out our website, LinkedIn page, Facebook, follow us on Twitter to see what new webinars we'll be continuing to bring to you as we continue to work through this crisis and look forward to the future. I mean, there's been a lot you know, a lot going on, and we've tried to bring some hot topics to, you know, businesses, both in our case, generic businesses or manufacturer distributors, but also the cannabis industry. I encourage you to check it out, and keep an eye on what we're doing, because you'll see us with some more fireside chats, and actually they'll become springside chats in the spring here into May. So anyway, Ken, stay safe. Appreciate your jumping on with me, and we look forward to talking to everybody soon. Take care.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks.